Hey, true crime fans! Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news! With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey there. Looking to level up your shopping experience? Let me introduce you to Amazon Live. If you haven't heard, it's a shoppable video experience where influencers and creators showcase the latest must-haves all while you shop in real time. And for those who love some celeb gossip, reality stars like Kyle Richards, Lala Kent, and friend of the pod, Paige DeSorbo. On her new show, In Bed with Paige DeSorbo, Paige invites top-tier guests to cozy up in her fluffy bed where they spill secrets, share nighttime routines, and even whip up midnight snacks. Stream and shop new episodes of her series In Bed with Paige DeSorbo every Tuesday at 7 p.m. ET by going to amazon.com/live/Paige_DeSorbo. Or you can watch Amazon Live's new live TV channel on Freevee or Prime Video under the DIY section and shop along on your phone.
Hello and welcome to 31 Days of Terror, day number 7. And for today's episode, I am joined by the wonderful Tim Cloke. Tim is a regular on Patreon and has been the co-host on a main episode too. He is an avid historian and all-round good guy. Today, he is bringing us more terrifying tales from the wilderness of Dartmoor. You can follow Tim on YouTube at Mr. Cloke History and on Instagram at Dry Wipe History. The links to Tim's YouTube and Instagram will be in the description of this episode. And this episode was recorded remotely, so the sound quality may be different to what you are used to. And I am joined today in the virtual studio by the wonderful, the effervescent, the glorious Tim Cloke. Tim, how are you?
I'm very well, Emma. We were just saying, weren't we? It feels like about 5 minutes ago we last did a recording, and then we realised, no, it's actually about 3 or 4 months.
Yes,
so where is the year gone? Oh, so long.
Are you glad that autumn is rolling in, speaking of the year being gone?
Well, given that I'm trying to get back into running, like yourself, but you're doing a lot better than me, it has to be said. I'm really appreciating the cooler evenings, it has to be said. And there's something about Devon in autumn, just as the trees are turning and you just feel it in the air. And I'm all right with that. As a teacher, the new year kind of rolls around in September for me.
Yeah.
So I'm okay. Yeah.
And as an ex-teacher, the new year for me is still September. I still have not quite lost that feeling of September being the new year. And I'm an autumn girly and winter. I like jeans and a jumper. Like that's hook it to my veins.
Yeah.
I'm here for
you're
it.
So right. So right. But yeah, doing well. Anyone who's worried about Lily, she's been made a lot of progress, by the way, since we last spoke. She can now use the cat flap. So that's good.
Oh, Lily is, for anybody who needs reminding, Lily is Tim's little cat who is gorgeous, but is in proud possession of approximately 2 brain cells.
Maybe 3, but yeah, I think 2 most weeks. I mean, she did briefly forget to use the cat flap, or rather forget how to. And I needed to start posting her through it again for an entire week. And then she sort of remembered again. And you just think, oh, bless your heart. I mean, you've had a bit of a disadvantaged start to your life. I'm going to keep on trying with you. But yeah, she's doing really well. She's very chatty at the moment. This time of year, she just keeps on interrupting things. So she's heard in the background. I think that's worth the explanation. She's
adding to the story, I believe. She's dramatic effect in the background.
That's right. She's just my little familiar.
Oh, I mean, she is a little smushed face cutie. I just love her.
She's the squidgiest cat in the world. I mean, I've not contacted Guinness yet, but she is.
It's only a matter of time before they contact you, I would imagine.
Excuse me, clearing my throat. Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, someone's heard about it. Anyone will have seen it through the window. Then it's bound to be known.
Do you think that's what Guinness do? They just go around looking in through people's windows, being like, "What weird shit are you up to that we can add to the Guinness Book of Records?"
We've heard things about this town. There are strange things going on here. We'll find something.
And you just get a knock on the door. That's who the real Men in Black are. It's the guys from Guinness World Records.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, they've got to fill that book every year. Why not?
Yeah, I used to love that book when I was a kid. Did you? I used to be
Yeah.
obsessed with flicking through it. I specifically liked all the like human oddities. Those
Yeah,
were my favorites.
Same. Yeah, longest fingernails, all that
Yeah.
sort of stuff. Couldn't get enough of it.
It just blew my mind. I was like, wow, someday I'll be in the Guinness Book of Records. I don't know what the heck for, but.
And given my interest, it would say, oh, the world's fastest car. I'd be like, whatever.
Oh, yeah,
But
I'd
then,
be like, boo, don't care.
Yeah, the most playing cards stacked one on top of the other. Yes, okay. Want to see the photograph? We're talking really in a pre-internet age here, aren't we? A more innocent time.
Although my nephews still read it now.
Good
and they still do that same thing of, like my eldest nephew in Ireland is like 9 and he still does that thing of just flicking to the human oddities, being like, who's got long fingernails?
You see, it's nice to know that some things haven't changed.
I know, some things never change. But Tim, you are here to bring us some tales from your adventures.
I have. It's been a while, hasn't it? Because the last 2 years before this summer just passed, I wasn't able to get up on my beloved Dartmoor through illness, injury, or sometimes actually just terrible weather. But I did manage to get up there this year. And so I've got more tales to tell of my walk, of the landmarks and the legends that I came into contact with. And I'm really, really genuinely looking forward to telling you about it because I've missed doing this sort of thing so much. I've missed going up there and I've missed really having the chance to talk about it afterwards.
And I think we had a chat beforehand before we started recording about like how remote and wild and wonderful Dartmoor is. It's really hard to explain.
Yeah.
So you were saying that you sort of added some bits in today about like the preparation of going up there, how important it is to prepare because it's incredibly dangerous.
That's right. I mean, I don't want to over kind of sell it because the dangers are there, but they're mostly the sort of dangers that are avoidable if you do your planning and if you do your homework in advance. So I'm very keen on doing that. So I don't want to put people off going up there because it is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm a big believer that the moor is to be enjoyed and visited and cherished and protected. But I've noticed from people's comments in the past saying, well, how actually do you get there? What do you need to do in order to prepare? And it's strange to be able to describe how somewhere which is an hour's drive away from me, maybe an hour and a half, it can feel so utterly remote. And I think that's one of my favorite things about it.
Are you ready to get started?
I'm totally ready to get started.
Let's do this.
Let's do it. All right. So this is my third wild camping trip up to Dartmoor. And with this time, there is going to be a bit of a theme. So our first story is going to clue you into this year's theme. Here we go. The Tavistock Inn in the small village of Poundsgate had long been host to the weary travellers of the West Country, even in the year 1638. Situated on the eastern edge of inhospitable Dartmoor since the 1400s, it had been a vital haven for those preparing to take the steep and treacherous trackways across the moor, providing food, drink and lodging to both man and beast in need of respite on their arduous journeys. By October, the number of travellers was tailing off, people being more wary of the changeable moorland weather as autumn took hold and the leaves began to fall. On one such quiet day, the door opened and the bored serving girl, who had made only a token effort to keep herself busy with chores, looked on as a towering figure in a long coat seemed to fill the door. He stood, casting a deep shadow that seemed to grasp towards her. He stepped across the flagstones with a sharp report of nailed shoes on stone, almost sounding like the advance of a horse across cobbles. Approaching the bar, hood still drawn over much of his face, this stranger smiled maliciously to the startled barmaid. Can I help you, goodly sir? The girl stammered, unconsciously clutching at her apron for warmth as an icy chill seemed to follow the dark stranger through the door. Just an ale, miss, replied the man. She hurried over to the wooden cask behind the bar and drew off a pint into a pewter tankard. Through the door on the cobbles from the inn, she saw the stranger's horse, prodding its hooves into the ground as if impatient to continue. She had never seen a beast to compare. It must have been the same size as the mighty draught horses that pulled the heaviest carts and ploughs, and yet it had the nimble build of the field hunter. Most of all, it was black. Beyond black. It seemed to absorb the light around it into an abyss, with hair that seemed in places to glisten and drip slightly with perspiration or grease. Or was that... The girl realised that she had overfilled the tankard and the ale spilled foaming onto the floor. She gasped. If the innkeeper saw, there would be hell to pay. She hurried back to the waiting stranger, who grasped the tankard from her hand impatiently. She winced and she clutched her hand back to her breast, much as if she had carelessly brushed the hot skillet handle on the range. The dark stranger raised the tankard to his grinning mouth and gulped it down greedily. She swore that as the man drank, she could hear the ale hiss and sizzle as it passed down his neck, sounding like an unattended pot overboiling on an open fire. The man slammed the tankard down again, and to her horror and amazement, the metal branded a blackened ring on the oak bar. The stranger wiped his mouth and placed a couple of coins into the barmaid's still stinging palm. Then, with a swish of his coat, he strode out the door again. With an unnatural leap, he mounted his horse and... could it be possible? The serving girl thought she saw cloven hooves where the man's riding boots should have been. With a brisk kick, the horse cantered off down the road towards the high moor, and the breeze through the door brought the unmistakable stench of sulphur that stung her nostrils. In a final shock, the girl looked down. Where the coins had been, there were now only dried autumnal leaves that scattered from her palm as the wind blew in. A burned bar, spilled beer, and now no payment? The devil himself was making work for her idle hands.
I love a devil story.
That's
right,
such a good
first
one.
off, I'm just going to say it, right?
Go on.
I'm saying what everyone's thinking.
What's this?
Is the devil kind of hot in this?
Well, if that is what you read into this... He's treacherous, isn't he? He's tempting you in.
Aside from the sulfur...
Yeah.
That I wouldn't be down with that. That wouldn't be okay. Also, I don't like a man who doesn't pay for his drink, right?
No, so that's not on, is it?
Pay for the drink. The leaves, shut up. Pay for the drink.
I mean, that is the biggest dick move, really, isn't it? Just saying, I'll give you some coins. Oh, no, it's autumn leaves.
And that
Unlucky,
poor
it's
girl,
October.
she's the one that's going to have to suffer for that.
They're going to come out of her wages, as is the spilled beer. But yeah, this is the devil. What do you expect?
I know, but like, come on, a bit of decorum. I always imagine the devil to have a bit of decorum about him.
You'd have thought so. I think in a sense he has. He seems perfectly polite. But maybe I'm kind of channeling that sort of Daphne du Maurier long coats in the inn sort of look here. Maybe that's a bit of artistic license. But what I've described in this story is all taken from versions of this story that I've heard before. So we are talking about a specific date, October in 1638. And we are going to revisit what the devil was up to that day, because this is only one part of a much bigger story.
Oh.
This is just him on his way to much dastlier deeds, which we will conclude with.
Sorry, this is only the start of his journey.
This is only the start of the devil's journey across Dartmoor.
I'm here for it.
So let's think a little bit more about what the devil has got to do with Dartmoor. The folklore of Dartmoor is rich and varied, yet one recurring character seems to play a part in more than his fair share of the stories of this landscape. He goes by a number of names. Some call him the Beast, others Lucifer or Old Nick, others refuse to utter a name at all. The devil seems well at home in the bleak but beautiful land of Dartmoor. Perhaps his treachery stands in as an apt metaphor for the dangers the moor presents to the unwary inhabitant or traveller. Perhaps this region holds on to the old ways more than the more developed regions, or perhaps this region really has been host to more tales of a diabolical nature than most. This summer, I embarked on my third backpack camping trip to Dartmoor, planning another route taking in as much of the moor's rich history and folklore as I could. As I describe my journey, and the necessary changes of plan I had to make as I went, I invite your imagination to join me on a wide 25-mile arc of the moor. Spread across 2 days, we will encounter stories of ghosts, superstition, and ancient beliefs before returning to my starting point and bringing our story full circle to matters concerning visits by the devil himself and the ruin he brought to terrified members of Dartmoor's community. I humbly invite you to believe these stories, or to believe some of the historical explanations, or perhaps take a little bit of both as we embark upon another trip into the dark hills and darker history of one of England's last remaining wildernesses. So strap on your pack, lace up your boots, and if you need to, suspend your disbelief for just a little while. So I'm going to start by describing how you prepare for a trip up Dartmoor. Do you have any questions first of all, or do you want me to just launch into it?
No, I don't think I have any questions. I feel quite excited. I had not realized that today's episode was going to be devil heavy. So I'm happy about this. I'm here for it. I'm ready.
Well, I'm happy to deliver in that case. Well, let's think about how I prepared for this, because each of the walks that I've done up there, funnily enough, I've had in mind doing these episodes afterwards, because we spoke about it, you, me and Dan, we all spoke about it before I did the very first episode way back in 2020, I think it was. And I'd already marked on the map lots and lots of places which are associated with folklore and the paranormal in a bright green pen on my Dartmoor map. And so when I just get that map out again and start planning the route, that is what I'm looking for. How can I thread as many of these places together? And it actually makes a really good walk. But I've done the north of the moor. I'm going to a different part this time. So this time I decided to explore the east of the moor, or at least begin my journey there. I had planned this walk 2 years ago, but a combination of illness, marathon training, and horrendous summer weather prevented me from embarking on the trip until the middle of August this year. I checked the Ministry of Defence website to make sure that there were no live firing exercises scheduled for the regions of the moor I planned to visit. One must always be mindful of unexploded ordnance, in addition to the more natural dangers. As usual, in the summer, no exercises were planned for the army. Weather forecasts kept warning of the hottest days of the summer so far, so I had made plans to carry extra water and factored in more places to replenish this most sustaining of supplies. I packed extra sunscreen and double-checked that my hat and sunglasses were with me. Packing for a lone camping trip is a delicate balance. It is better to have something and not need it than to need something in the middle of the moor and not have it. And yet, every last item adds weight to my rucksack, and so it needs to be justified and it needs to be prioritised. Space is at a premium. With such fine weather forecast, it seemed to make sense to leave the waterproofs behind, but they're light and relatively small, so I knew better than to admit them. Having not camped on the moor since 2021, I checked and double-checked everything. By the end, my backpack weighed about 20 kilograms or 45 pounds. Within it, or strapped to it, included maps, compass plus a spare, wash kit, sleeping bag, inflatable ground sheet, tent, first aid and blister kit, waterproofs, changes of underwear, extra socks and layers for warmth, head torch, battery pack and associated leads, sunscreen, insect repellent, military rations for 4 meals and snacks in between, 2.5 litres or half a gallon of water, a cooking stove, eating implements, walking poles, multi-tool and knife. Much of this contained in waterproof nylon bags. This still left a bit of room for some apparent luxuries, but which experience has shown were well worth the cost in weight and space. A slim volume of Cornish ghost stories to read at dusk, a small set of binoculars, a folding stool, and most vital of all at the end of a long day in heavy boots, a pair of flip-flops to rest and dry the feet once the tent was pitched. Virtually every one of these items got used, except, mercifully, the first aid kit. Since 2021 and my last camp on Dartmoor, work-based stress, illness, and a pretty significant injury have meant that I too was carrying a little bit more weight about my person before I even put on my backpack, and I had lost much of the fitness I had when I last ran a marathon only 16 months before, and some of my faith in my body to carry me through had also been lost, especially my back and what I was about to put it through. However, I felt determined to proceed given the known benefits of such a trip to my state of mind, and have sent my plans to trusted friends and family with the strict instruction that they must raise the alarm if they had not heard from me by 8 p.m. on the following day. Such arrangements are not dramatic. They are necessary. I left North Devon under grey skies with a light drizzle spotting on the windscreen of my car, but all the forecasts I had studied assured me that the moor was set for at least 2 days of fine weather. The weather is almost always a supporting, or more often antagonistic, character in any tale of the moor, and so it proved from the very moment of my arrival. It takes only an hour to maybe 90 minutes to drive from my home to most parts of the moor, but I approached the journey with due apprehension. I'm not the most experienced driver, but the experience I do have is largely on the winding, narrow lanes of Devon that catch out unwary visitors. Even then, the moment I left the B3212, yes, that is the Hairy Hands Road, from Morton Hampstead and entered the narrow lane at ancient Batworthy Cross, I turned off my music and focused extra hard. Within seconds, I encountered 2 cyclists. I gave them all the space they needed, and they returned the courtesy by waving me forward at a widening where a gate branched from the road. Within minutes, I encountered a herd of beautiful South Devon cattle being hurried up the lane by a cane-wielding farmer. Imagine my surprise when he indicated that I, and not the cows, should drive into the field next to me. "I don't want these girls scratching your car, boy," he called, as if my car, like all those in Devon, wasn't already scratched and scarred by hedges, brambles and ferns on the passenger side. Naturally, I obliged and reversed through the gateway, as did the cyclists who by then had caught up. The cattle tramped by, in such fine condition with their glossy orange-red coats as to look like they were off to the county show, and they eyed me with apparent boredom rather than suspicion as they passed, tiny calves tucked in close. I proceeded further down the lane, and the road climbed, and as it climbed, the view became gradually misty, and then suddenly very foggy. Unwary and overconfident drivers, I decline to call them tourists, for that category actually includes me, We'd hurtle around corners with headlights extinguished in an absence of care, but my caution was enough to prevent a handful of calamities. Sunken lanes eroded by centuries of hooves and feet to improbable depths gradually gave way to narrow roads flanked by dry stone walls, and then the open moor. But still, the fog hemmed me in. I passed Kitty J's grave, risking a fleeting glance over my shoulder to confirm that yes, indeed, the fresh flowers were still there, and then past the ghostly outline of Hound Tor and the deserted village below it, abandoned almost 700 years ago after being ravaged by the Black Death. Still, my underpowered car climbed up the lane, and as it did, the visibility deteriorated to the point that I could see perhaps only 30 feet in front of me. I silently hoped that the forecast sunshine would soon burn away this mist, as it had promised to do. Finally, I descended the steep hill towards the place my walk would start. There, by the side of the road, was the sign, "Welcome to Widdicombe in the Moor. Thank you for driving with more care," with the pun emphasised by a cartoonish drawing of many men on the back of a grey mare, an echo of the old English folk song, Widdicombe Fair. Just like the horse in the song, I was about to be overburdened, though hopefully not with the same fatal results. And as I pulled into the car park, it was already busy with day trippers, coach passengers, wild campers, cyclists, trail runners, old Uncle Tom Cobley and all, old Uncle Tom Cobley and all. I was, after a tricky drive, counterintuitively at my journey's start.
It's amazing how treacherous those roads can be.
Yeah.
Just listening to you describing it. So I grew up in rural Ireland, right, and learned to drive in rural Ireland, and I have similar experience on the roads. Like driving on little windy single track roads do not bother me. Like
No.
I'm fine. It doesn't freak me out. If I meet a big tractor, I'm like, it's fine. I'll just reverse. Like we'll figure it out. But let me tell you, other people driving on those roads.
No idea.
So I went to I went to Loch Ness a couple of years ago, and I was driving in the Highlands, and that is like treacherous roads, like little teeny tiny roads that are off the edge of a cliff kind of roads.
Yeah.
And I'd be driving along, really taking my time, inching along, and next thing, like tourists in a huge camper van would just come hurtling towards me, and I'd be like, no, that's not how this works.
Nope.
One of us is gonna die.
The thing is, it's like most rural roads, you get passing places, don't you? But when you're really out in the sticks, they don't even have those. So there are times where you simply just have to reverse for ages or find a gateway that you can open, making sure there are no cows going to escape or anything else. And you do make it through there. But it's that old lesson, isn't it? You only drive as fast as you can stop within what you can see. And sometimes you're in the mist, and when you're on these bends, you're going at walking pace. And that's just how it is. It's like my nan used to say, "'Tis better to be 5 minutes late in this world than 10 minutes early in the next, my dear," she would say. And she's quite right.
Dead right.
So I was absolutely determined to follow that sort of advice. But yeah, I mean, that was just the adventure getting onto the moor and getting to Widdicombe in the Moor, where I was going to park my car up and set off on my adventure. I
also have a major problem with this in that I am a hectic packer. So every time I'm packing to go somewhere, and I travel a lot, right? So every time I'm packing to go somewhere, I'm like, I'm going to make a list. I'm going to pack early. I'm going to pack at least 2 days before. I'm going to sit down. I'm going to really think about this. And genuinely, I've been getting the train to places at 6 o'clock in the morning and started packing at 5:30. Like,
I can totally imagine it.
I just hate, like, it just irks me. So I just would struggle to pack appropriately for Dartmoor. I'd be like, I know all the things that I need to bring, but also I'm just going to bring 7 pairs of trainers.
Yeah. The thing is, I'm very much like you if I'm going anywhere that my life doesn't literally depend on me getting it right. So I've had to kind of train myself to think, test your stove is working, because you don't want to get up there and it not to be working. Admittedly, that's not exactly life and death. You just have your rations cold or whatever. But if you get there and you realize that the bottle's leaking, or the first aid kit is full of, I don't know, sweets or something instead of the things you actually need, then you've only got yourself to blame in those situations. And it's no good only having yourself to blame when you have no one else to turn to, because you can kick yourself all you like, but that isn't going to bring anyone to your rescue any quicker. So sharing of routes. And the thing is, you've got to be mindful that when you're up there, your plans are going to change almost inevitably. So your route is only ever really a guide, but you still share it and say, well, this is where I'm most likely to be. And then when you have to change route, you think, all right, so if I break my leg in the next 200 yards, am I still likely to be found? And if I'm not likely to be found, is it really worth making this detour, or should I take the other risk? And you make these little calculations. But I don't want to make it sound like it isn't great fun, because it absolutely is. Yeah. You've just got to be sensible about it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That's reasonable.
Yeah. I've not even got onto all the folklore and paranormal stuff that I'm going to encounter. So should we get on to the next part of my walk?
Let's do it.
I set off past the Church of St Pancras, so called the Cathedral of the Moor for its grand size compared to the village it serves. We will return to St Pancras Church at the end of our stories and of my walk for one of the most famous of Dartmoor's many supernatural tales. I barely had time to warm up before tackling the first of many inclines up a bramble-strewn and rutted farm path. Within 20 minutes I found myself on the high moor of Hamel Down, feeling satisfaction at being out on the hills again after such a long break. Hamel Down is a high ridge of land to the west of Widdicombe, carrying along its spine part of the Two Moors Way, a long-distance path which, in this location, follows a much more ancient ridgeway. In times past, travellers would exchange effort in the climb for better drained and safer ground up high, and traversing the moor today, this is often still the best option. Emerging through a rickety gate, I was struck by the bleak but beautiful moorland. There were impossibly gnarled, blackened bushes from a wildfire some 2 summers before, but beneath was sprouting the hopeful resurrection of new gorse bushes. The sides of the trackway were filled with wispy apparitions, many spiderwebs, floating eerily between the foliage, made silver with condensation. The path north, paved with eroded granite bedrock and closely grazed, and with trampled grass, was flanked on either side by a luscious carpet of deep purple heather and yellow furze flowers, which competed with the thick and drifting fog still shrouding the hillside. Weather-beaten and incongruous pine poles driven into the earth loom from the mist, the improbable remains of Second World War anti-glider defences, should invaders, for some mad reason, have chosen to launch their conquest of Britain from one of its least accessible places. On this ancient track, I relied on my memory of the map, my compass, and the help of the ancients in finding my way. To us, a cemetery is usually a place of remembrance and neatly packed tombstones. However, travellers without the benefit of modern maps or technology had to use whatever landmarks were to hand, and in the thick fog I found myself in their position. The barrows came into view suddenly in the cloud, appearing as distinctive outlines against the white and grey obscuring the views. First, Hamel Down Beacon, an ancient cairn, likely marking the site of an important burial. Next, the smaller single barrow, its name explained by the subsequent site of double-mounded 2 barrows, all of them with their tops long since hollowed out by the treasure hunters of old. Finally, a fork in the road at Broad Barrow, a longer mound still. At this point, we will ponder the practices of burial of the ancient inhabitants of the moor. Modern monuments explain precisely who they memorialise and why, but ancient peoples were at once more connected to their ancestors, but also left for us to discover. We can never know who was buried in these monuments, the ravages of the acidic soil and the desecrations of antiquarians and looters wiping the slate clean of clues. What we can experience, though, is their place in the land. There is little evidence of Stone Age or Neolithic occupation on Dartmoor in this part of the moor, but Bronze Age people have littered the hillsides with their landscapes of the living and their landscapes of the dead. Bronze Age burials typically consisted of an individual crouched burial, the dead laid down as if in rest or sleeping, perhaps surrounded by items of status and worth. Later cairns held multiple cremated remains. The cause of this change in tradition is unknown. The few mounds to be found suggests that this was a rite preserved for men and women of high status. Perhaps, as we see in some recorded cultures, there was a strong oral tradition passing down their memory until changes in climate, demographics, and the upheaval of England's settling and invading peoples meant that they faded from mind. The location of these barrows is obvious, though, making them visible from the other hilltops and by anyone using the well-travelled trackways beside and below. In a sense, their deceased inhabitants, while unknown, remain memorialised. Medieval and early folk tales of giants' graves, pisky houses, and the work of the devil try to make sense of the unknown, but what is clear is that the earliest barrows on the moor were as ancient to the people of the Iron Age as the Romans are to us today. Christian monks sometimes repurposed them with their own granite crosses placed atop them. The trackways so clearly following and respecting the location of these monuments shows how many ancient footsteps the modern hiker is walking in. As the mist scuds across the barrows, it is easy to see the ghosts of the long departed amongst the vague outlines of stones, ponies, and multi-millennia old boundaries. We are the visitors in their landscape. If the commons of Dartmoor belongs to anyone, it is these unknown ancestors. Descending from the Barrow Cemetery, ordinarily one would be confronted by the massive remains of the best preserved of all of Dartmoor's Bronze Age settlements, once the home of the contemporaries and descendants of those at rest in the hills above. But on this day, as I gingerly picked my way down the rock-strewn slope, all I could see was the ever-persistent mist. Water dripped incessantly from the peak of my cap and coated my beard in beads of condensation, but at least it was cooling. Grimspound sits at the base of a steep valley, between the surrounding hills and tors. On a clear day, it can be viewed in its entirety from above, hardly a well-chosen site from a defensive point of view. More likely, it was built actually to be seen, as a mark of status and a statement that its inhabitants felt that they were under no threat. Even on this murky day, the massive granite belt walls suddenly came into view, with the well-preserved and still impressive original gateway lining up precisely with the trackway. These walls kept both people and livestock safe from the native wolves and bears that prowled the hills by night in darkest prehistory. Within this megalithic structure are 20 or so hut circles, their doorways facing toward the sun, but away from the prevailing winds, or else protected by a clever dogleg porchway. Some appear to have smaller adjoining huts, perhaps for animals, storage or grain. Few are more than 10 feet wide, and yet these modest huts provided shelter and comfort for generations of families for more than 700 years before its final abandonment as climate cooled at the end of the Bronze Age, and the soils of Dartmoor became exhausted and acidified. The name of Grimspound is incredibly evocative. On Dartmoor, the suffix pound refers to virtually any stone enclosure, often assumed to be associated with the confinement of livestock. But grim? One theory is that this relates to the Old English word for the devil, explaining modern associations with the word, and perhaps suggesting a diabolical origin for the enclosure. Another explanation is that it relates to Grima, an alternative Norse name for Odin, meaning the masked one. Indeed, the King's Barrow nearby was supposed, incorrectly, to contain the grave of a Viking chieftain after a long since lost Norse-style dagger was found within it. Disappointingly, though, these names are 18th and 19th century in origin. The misinterpretation of antiquarians and the misinformation of those trying to tempt the wealthy to tour the moor. Our biggest clues that this is the case? In this land of ghosts, mystery, and legends, there are none. None that relate to Grimspound. With the mist concealing whatever remaining secrets Grimspound has, I decided not to dwell there and headed for hopefully clearer air in the valley below.
Do you know what's mad, right? Listening to that is, I can't remember how you phrased it. So, as long away as the Romans are from us,
yeah.
What was it? The Iron Age.
So the Bronze Age is as far away from the Iron Age as the Romans are from us.
That's wild.
So the Bronze Age is 2,000 years earlier than the Iron Age, and the Romans are 2,000 years before us.
That's mad.
It's so long, isn't it? So when we kind of have this temptation to think that, oh, these prehistoric people, they must have known exactly what these barrows were all about. They probably didn't. If they did, then it's incredible because all the archaeology suggests that they were actually different communities of people. They weren't subsequent in the sense that they just discovered new technology. There was at times, especially after the Neolithic, so the Stone Age, there was virtually a complete replacement of the population of the country by a different people and a different culture, which is a developing theory and one that's far from being proven, but something that for a long time seemed impossible, but is now emerging to look to be more likely. But that sense that the stories of the Moor are still developing and probably always have done is something that I absolutely love, because whatever explanation for these different landmarks that I'm using to find my way across the moor, they are the same landmarks as have always been used. And it just gives a natural logic to where you're going.
Like, that's crazy that they've been around for that long. And actually, you know, for as long as they've been around, people probably haven't known what they were actually for. It's
one of the first things I try and get my head around whenever I'm dealing with prehistory, is just coming to terms with the fact that just know that you're not going to know. And if you can get around that and be happy with that, then all other explanations become much more fun and more plausible in my mind.
Yeah, but I struggle with that. I want to know.
Well, that's another way of looking at it. But personally, I want to continue trying to find out, but I'm okay if I never do.
No.
The discovery is as good as finding the answer.
No. I'm an instant gratification kind of person. I want to know the answer, please.
We're going to agree to disagree on this.
I want to know the answer, and I want to know it definitively.
Also, I feel like I should apologise because that was just a massive con. Because I honestly thought before I did my research for this that Grimspound would have some sort of diabolical association. I thought that is why I'm going to include this on my walk.
Yeah,
it's going to be called Grimspound for a reason. And I go there, I do the research, and I go, oh, what do you mean there's nothing? There can't be nothing. This is one of the most famous sites in Dartmoor. So I'm sorry I led everyone down the garden path there, but I'm not going to lie to you. So at least you know that you can trust the rest of these stories.
Yeah, and also it still has a historical place. Like, just because it doesn't have a crazy spooky story attached to it doesn't mean it's not important.
I tell you what, it was crazy, spooky atmosphere to be there, though.
Yeah.
With that thick mist, which I'd been assured would not be there. And you know what it's like when it just blows across your view. The views at the top of Hamel Down, I'm sure, are absolutely spectacular because I could see it from a distance when the weather had cleared up. I just couldn't see a thing of it. So honestly, the only way I could have found my way there was by following these ancient landmarks, and it just makes complete sense that is what you do. There's no phone signal. I've got maps and I've got a compass, but you can use your compass to find where you're going, but you can't see where you're going because there's no reference point on the horizon at all. You just hope that you're going in the right direction, and then in a way that is, unless you've experienced it, it's hard to describe how sudden it is. Suddenly there is a barrow. Yeah. And you go, oh, there's two. That's two barrows then. I know that's the next
brilliant.
one.
I know where I'm here. Yeah.
I'm on the right track. When you come to a fork in the road and you go, right, that's Broad Barrow. I'm going to take the right track here because I was going to another site there, which I've not included yet. There's a story about it later on, but it turned out not to be quite the one I was looking for. So I got a couple of photographs and then buggered off again. By this point, the mist is actually starting to lift a little bit. And so I'm well on my way to my next spooky location.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey there. Looking to level up your shopping experience? Let me introduce you to Amazon Live. If you haven't heard, it's a shoppable video experience where influencers and creators showcase the latest must-haves all while you shop in real time. And for those who love some celeb gossip, reality stars like Kyle Richards, Lala Kent, and friend of the pod, Paige DeSorbo. On her new show, In Bed with Paige DeSorbo, Paige invites top-tier guests to cozy up in her fluffy bed where they spill secrets, share nighttime routines, and even whip up midnight snacks. Stream and shop new episodes of her series In Bed with Paige DeSorbo every Tuesday at 7 p.m. ET by going to amazon.com/live/Paige_DeSorbo. Or you can watch Amazon Live's new live TV channel on Freevee or Prime Video under the DIY section and shop along on your phone.
Sure enough, by about 1 p.m, the mist was slowly beginning to burn off and the light strengthening. The summer of 2024 had proved ideal for the growth of wild plants, and the moorland ferns and bracken had taken full advantage, often growing to above even my 6-foot-plus frame. Chalacombe Valley was blanketed by swaying green leaves, but these could not disguise the enigmatic lumps and bumps of the landscape all around. Sharp scars led into the hillsides, the remains of the tin workings of ravenously digging miners, following the seams of this precious commodity into the unforgiving rock. One of these, Gold Dagger Mine, was the last to close on Dartmoor in 1930. But the discovery of the weapon that gave the mine its name suggests that the miners may have disturbed an ancient force on the moor. The cynical will doubtless decide that this was the bronze blade of one of the moor's ancient ancestors, but perhaps another explanation might be at play. Stepped earthworks cut parallel to the side of the hill are the remains of the strip lynchets where medieval farmers eked out an existence 800 years ago by ploughing more level ground out of the steep hillside. But amongst the cottages below persist rumours of others in the valley. There are still 3 or 4 incredibly inaccessible but cosy cottages at Chalacombe Hamlet, but between them are the remains of several abandoned ancient longhouses. The trackway passes low down the valley, and with good reason. On the spine of the hill can be glimpsed the outline of small rocky outcrops. These are the fairy rocks, and it is said that no horse will cross over the hill. The fields, mines, and even the rabbit-proof stone walls all skirt wide of these rocky edifices. The inhabitants of Chalacombe cottages have long heard the sound of distant tiny voices on the hillside, and known better than to investigate and to intrude. The fair folk seem happy to have allowed a certain amount of mining, a managed amount of farming, and a modest amount of building on the slopes of Chalacombe, but they will not countenance the approach of man or horse. I too took this to heart, mindful of my brush with the Piskies' house on Sheepstor during my last visit and the hardship that resulted from it. Usually, if you leave the Piskies alone, then they will do the same for you. And yet, as I passed by the most substantial of the medieval remains, I noted a small modern nod to the fairies, a tiny painted door inserted into the old drain hole at the base of the longhouse wall. As I passed by, I smiled and gave it a nod of acknowledgement. This may have been a very recent addition to the place, but it seemed more than prudent to give a subtle salutation to the ancient folk of Chalacombe Valley in the hopes of a safe and trouble-free passage. Heading onwards, though, I was initially pixie-led again. The tall bracken obscured the footpath to the small bridge over the West Webburn River, at this point only a stream. Brambles scratched my elbows and nettles irritated my legs as I kept careful watch for adders amongst the grass. Within minutes, though, I felt sure that I was making a mistake, even though everything seemed to be right. I stopped. I paused for thought, gathered my senses, and had a small thought of the fair folk on top the hill. It just did not feel right. I took a look at my reserve compass, and it suggested that I was 30 degrees off my expected course, compared it to my main compass, and they did show different courses. Then, looking up from the spare compass, and left across my shoulder, what did I see? A natural break in the bracken, and beyond it, the bridge that I was looking for. Not only that, but I suddenly felt the warmth of the sun on my back for the first time that day, and looked upwards to see blue sky and fast-moving cotton wool clouds. The mist had lifted from the moor at the same time as the fog had lifted from my mind, and all was surprisingly clear. This was the one time that I came close to taking a wrong turn on the whole 25-mile trip. It had cost me perhaps 200 yards of extra distance. Crossing the bridge, I stepped into a sun-drenched meadow with a clear view of the valley and a conveniently fallen granite gatepost. There could not have been a more perfect spot for a rest, a cup of tea, and some food to refuel. True or not, it was as if the invisible inhabitants of the moor had forgiven my previous trespasses and showed me the way back to the path and to a perfect outdoor picnic perch.
You know how I feel about fairy lore.
I do.
I just love it. And I would be like you. Like, I think that there is a perception that if you acknowledge or believe in sort of fairy lore, that it's like ridiculous, it's silly, it's blah, 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 blah. But actually, I think a huge amount of it is about just showing respect for your surroundings.
Yeah.
And in days gone by, in centuries gone by, fairy lore and don't go down that path, there's fairies down there, was a way of being like, that is dangerous. Bad things will happen to you, but we need to give it some like supernatural weight to keep people genuinely away from it. And fairies was enough because, as we have learned, they are not necessarily neutral.
No.
They don't want you in their space, on their land.
This is what I found out of my last trip when I was going up Sheepstor, and I had an absolutely torrid time from that point onwards. I mean, I lost the end of my walking pole. I kind of got lost at one point. None of the paths were appearing. I was getting blisters. It was absolutely dreadful, really. I mean, I still enjoyed the trip, but that was really, really tough. And it was the one time I was thinking, oh, what have I done to myself? I'm going to break my leg getting down here or something. But this time I was almost at the back of my mind. I just thought, yeah, just take a moment, just have a little smile about it, have a little think about it. And the way that I discovered that path over to the bridge, it was exactly as it happened. And it was like it all just happened at once. The sun coming out, me finding the path, me seeing the bridge over the way, and then I was already thinking after like 6 miles of walking, I was going to sit down and have something to eat, because 6 miles doesn't sound far, but on Dartmoor, that is a long way.
Oh, yeah, 6 miles is a long way.
It's a reasonable distance, isn't it? And I thought, well, the first time I see somewhere which has got a decent view and somewhere for me to sit, I'll stop there. And the moment I saw this path, this bridge, within 2 minutes, I had a place that I couldn't have made any better. It was just absolutely perfect. And I thought, yeah, if that is the Pixies helping me out, or Piskies, I should say, their Dartmoor variety, then yeah, I think that they've made up for their previous games they were playing on me.
Yeah, because that's obviously that was on a Patreon episode, I believe, where you talked about when you had a really rough time on the moor and you were like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I forgot to give them a gift. There's the Pixies house on Sheep's Tor, which I won't recount in full again here. But I was sort of stressed out by the amount of heat that there was that day and running out of water, and I forgot to leave them a gift. And it turned out that they took one anyway, because they made my walking poles useless by just taking the rubber studs off the end of them. And yeah, it was miserable. But this time it was the complete opposite. It was just the most perfect part of the day. And actually, genuinely, on this first day, that was my favorite moment of the entire trip. Loved it.
Well, it's like a natural epiphany, isn't it?
Yeah,
being like,
totally.
I found the perfect spot, and the there's a natural kind of break in the bracken. The clouds all disappear. It's beautiful. It's sunny. What a glorious moment!
And whatever you think of a cup of tea, there is no better tasting cup of tea than one enjoyed outside when you've had a good walk, and it's sugary and strong. Ew. And love it. You just hate tea, though, don't you?
Yeah, I don't drink tea, so.
Some of the listeners are going to agree with me there, I'm sure of it.
And also, I think some people will be quite shocked, because it's such an Irish and British thing to drink lots of tea. No, I don't drink tea. If I was to drink tea, it would have to be like tea with 2 sugars, super sweet.
You've never been one to conform, though. That's why we love you.
I know. Did you know? Right, this is a little known fact for you. Well, it's a really well known fact, but I'm going to throw it in here. You know Bob Mortimer. So Bob Mortimer, my favorite, is a comedian who I just fancy him so much. He used to have 17 sugars in his tea.
Oh, that is crazy. That's more sugar than tea.
But it's also Bob Mortimer, so it's not surprising. But he used to have 17 sugars in his tea.
Just syrup.
I mean, it's just hideous. But then he was like, and if somebody put 18 in, it'd be too sweet.
No, I can believe him. Yeah,
no, I can believe it. Yeah,
to his work. Yeah, totally believe that. But yeah, I'm probably about halfway through my first day's walking. But we've got more things to enjoy. Shall I proceed after my lunch?
Please proceed.
Suitably filled by a lunch consisting of strong, sugary British tea and starchy, filling US government property, this time in the form of an MRE military ration, I picked up my pack and set off for the next leg of the journey, now in blazing sunshine. Postbridge was only 3 miles away, but a mile on Dartmoor is often worth 3 anywhere else. My only concern was my drinking water levels. Nevertheless, the walk passed without incident. My good luck held even when confronted by suspicious cattle, protective of their young. Feeling slightly daft, I kept my distance and clearly but politely spoke to them. "Come on, ladies, out of the way, please. I need to get to the stepping stones." Immediately, they accommodated my request, moving off to the side, nudging their calves along with them. Perhaps the Piskies were helping me again. I picked my way across the stepping stones of 15th century Piswell Farm, keeping my feet dry, but the going had never actually been better. By the time I emerged from the fields, I found myself right back on the B3212, and to my right, not 50 yards away, the East Dart Inn, with an inviting chalk-written sign outside reading, "We are open." Now, part of the appeal of visiting the moor is to escape civilization and to live off the land for a while. But seeing no hairy hands on the road to prevent me, I treated myself to another rest and 2 enthusiastically consumed and ice-cold orange juice and lemonades. The friendly staff refilled my water bottles, and all was well with the world. The temptation to order a cold local cider or beer was incredible, but I resisted. At the back of my mind was the knowledge that any impairment of my sensibility could prove very costly on the high moor that I was about to cross onto. As if to reinforce the point, I was mindful of the legend of the grey weathers to keep me on the straight and narrow. Barely a mile from the East Dart Inn, where I gratefully sipped my cold beverage, is a competing watering hole, the Warren House Inn. This pub is central to our next story. In the early 1800s, a new farmer to the area rode his horse along the road from Morton Hampstead to Postbridge. He had leased a plot of land on the moor and was determined to make his fortune. As he rode his steed along the road, he looked over the dry stone walls at the sheep on the moor, and he was not impressed with what he saw. Elsewhere in the county, stout sheep, good for both mutton and wool, were the norm, but these moorland sheep were, as they still appear today, smaller, skinnier, and with more matted, ragged fleeces. He sneered in a self-satisfied way. Men who produced such livestock by bad husbandry would be no match for his experience of breeding the best sheep to be found in the county. The moorland air suddenly smelled of imminent wealth. Entering the Warren House Inn, he ordered a scrumpy cider and sat down to ponder his plans. Before long, another farmer approached him and introduced himself, politely asking his business. The new farmer said, "I, sir, am here to purchase a flock of sheep to start up my new farm on the moor, but I must say I am far from impressed." "How so?" inquired the local man. "Well, sir, you cannot tell me the sheep I have seen in these parts are suitable for my purposes. They are totally useless. They're breeding the result of bad husbandry, and their owner is clearly ignorant of the new ways of selective breeding." The arrogance of this statement stung the pride of the local man and several others who were eavesdropping. Likewise, they raised their eyebrows at the statement of this newcomer to the moor. "Oh, I wouldn't say all the sheep here are so poor. I have a friend of mine has a fine flock of sheep not 2 miles from here. I'll ask him over," said the local man. He called over his accomplice, and they shared a brief but knowing look. "Let me buy ye another cider, and us'll see what can be done." Before long, the men had shared several more ciders, and they were apparently getting on very well. In truth, though, the local men had a constitution far more suited to the scrumpy, which, in modern times, might aptly stand in for rocket fuel. "Tell 'ee what, my man, I'll sell 'ee some of my sheep if he wants 'em," said the second local man. "But buggered if I'm some fool. I'll want a fair price for them, mind." "I'll not cheat you with a fair price, good sir, but likewise I'm no fool. I'll not shake your hand at a bargain until I've seen them with my own eyes," replied the new visitor to the moor. Happily, it was the summer, and there were a few hours of daylight left. The men got up, quite unsteadily, it must be said, and mounted their horses. "Lead the way, sir. Show me this flock of yours, and if they're half as good as you say they are, you'll have your silver." The men trotted north into the open moor. However, as they made the brief journey, the moorland weather played its unpredictable hand. Suddenly a mist descended on the hills. No matter, the new farmer thought, these local men will know the way. Soon they saw on the slope, just beyond a little stream, the outline of the flock. Now these were more like it. They were bold of bearing, unbending to the wind, and rectangular of form. Grey and stout, surely these were ideal sheep for the new farmer's purposes. "What are they, rams, wethers, ewes?" asked the new farmer, almost ready to strike the bargain. "'Tis a mixture of wethers and ewes, but you'll be able to put your own ram to tuck with them and raise as fine a flock as you like." The deal was struck with a handshake, and the men headed back down the hill to exchange coins and seal the deal over a few more pots of local cider. By nightfall, the new farmer was bereft of both his coins and his senses, and the innkeeper put him to bed. Come morning, the new farmer opened bleary, reddened eyes to see it was already late morning. He sat up on his bed and groaned. What did these rustics put in their cider? He dressed unsteadily and walked down the stairs, bumping from wall to wall to settle his bill. His arrears paid, he asked the innkeeper where the others had gone. "Oh, those fellows headed off at dawn. They're not from these parts, as it is. They've gone off in the direction of Tavistock." "What the blazes do you mean, not from these parts? One of the blackguards sold me his flock yesternight." "Well, what flock be this then?" inquired the innkeeper, suppressing a smile. "Upon yonder hill," said the farmer with a gesture of his arm. "Then he'd best go up and see him then, I suppose." Sure enough, the farmer headed out in the morning sunlight, following the track that they had travelled the day before. Then he arrived at the foot of the same hill, at the bank of the same stream, and there on the hill were the same shapes, not sheeps, just as stout and as grey as the day before, and in precisely the same place. Precisely. The farmer blundered off his horse, splashed through the stream, and roared in indignant rage as he saw that these grey wethers were nothing more than two circles of ancient standing stones, the one next to the other, standing in silent mockery of him. That day the farmer learned several valuable life lessons. One must not mock the quality of the local farmers or their sheep. One must not trust a stranger in a pub to his word. And perhaps most of all, one must not underestimate the strength of the local cider.
I'd be caught out by the locals in a heartbeat.
Easily done, isn't it?
That's such a great story because there are so many lessons within that. It's like that local cider is going to blow the head off you, first of all.
Yeah.
And local people will absolutely rinse you if they think you're a big fucking moneyed farmer coming in, being like, look at these peasants on the moor.
And the great thing is, those two stone circles, which are very likely a Bronze Age monument, they are still called the Grey Weathers to this day. And this is the origin of the story. So
The Grey Weathers.
Yeah, the Grey Weathers. So a weather.
I love that.
Yeah, so a wether is for anyone who's not of a farming persuasion, is a castrated male sheep, basically. It's so yeah, the grey wethers, they're essentially useless to the farmer. That's the joke of it. But I do love that. So, whether there's any truth to this story, that's the thing with all this folklore. That is the supposed origin of that stone circle's name. But I absolutely love the idea of him getting absolutely hammered on this local cider and being caught a cropper.
Oh yeah, I mean, we've all been there where we've been not. I mean, admittedly, I don't drink cider. And I think probably for this reason, because it would blow the head off me.
You know, it's not that usual because, like anywhere, most pubs sort of serve the mass-produced stuff these days. But occasionally, you can still find a local pub down here, and I've seen landlords do it where you get newcomers coming in and they say, "Ooh, I'll have a cider, I think." I said, "Yeah, what can I get you?" I said, "Oh, I'll have a pint of that one there." And the man behind the bar will go, "No, you won't." What do you mean? He says, "You'll have a half and see how you get on." So he'll serve a half pint and say, "Well, you give it a try. If you don't like it, then you won't have wasted your money. And if you can't handle it, then you won't have wasted your time. So just have a half and see how you get on. And if you like it, then great.
I could see our Lorenzo doing that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Lorenzo is the landlord of our much loved local pub, the Unicorn Inn. And I could see him being like, no.
You don't know what you're handling here. So
no.
Be careful. So I don't know whether that really counts as a paranormal story, but I love it as a bit of folklore.
Oh, it's a great bit of folklore.
And I've mentioned a couple of times now, but I realise not all listeners will know. I keep on talking about these hairy hands on the B3212, and we've mentioned it so many times before. It doesn't bear too much repeating, but it's one of the most famous stories of the moor, isn't it? It's that drivers go along this road, in recent times, because we're talking about motorists here, and a pair of disembodied hairy hands will wrestle them off the road, occasionally with fatal results as well.
Yeah,
and
so they'll grab the steering wheel and turn the wheel, and it happens on bikes too.
Happens on bikes. It's happened with a couple had settled down for the night in a caravan and a lay-by, and these hairy hands just appeared on the window, and they kind of screamed and hitched it and drove away. I mean, if I was cynical, which I am a bit, I might say that it had more to do with the local cider and some of the people who had, shall we say, some pretty dodgy ideas about drink driving back in the mid 20th century. But it's
don't be so cynical.
I tell you who's less cynical than me then. The RAF in World War II, a guy wrote off his bike, and the RAF did say, yeah, it was the hairy hands that did it. We'll just put down the loss to that and get on with our lives. They didn't want to question it because they knew the legend. So yeah, maybe I should be a little less cynical.
Yeah, maybe you should.
I feel like I've been put in my place now. Right, shall we continue to my campsite then?
Let's go.
Mindful that the temptation to order another drink and relax some more in the beer garden of the East Dart Inn might compromise my chances of making camp before dark, I thanked and tipped the bar staff and set off on the final leg of this first day of my trip. I'd already covered 10 miles and I knew that there were another 4 or 5 to go, with the last 3 on the roughest terrain of the day. I bypassed the massive stones of Postbridge Clapper Bridge, an ancient packhorse route over the East Dart River, as I would have only ruined the selfies of the day trippers already there. Cutting through the modern forest at Bellevator, I crossed the B3212, again being watchful of the hairy hands, that also acts as the boundary between the managed forest and the wilderness of the high moor. Soon the trackway dissolved into peaty earth, stubby rushes, and scattered granite as I made my way by compass in the pleasant warmth of the evening. I crossed the eerie ruins of the powder mills, a factory that had supplied gunpowder to the local tin industry almost 2 centuries before. The buildings were conspicuously massive in their construction, with walls built from 3 or 4 foot thick granite blocks. The logic here was clear. Should a stray spark from steel striking on the stone floors set off the gunpowder, a blast would be directed skywards, preserving the rest of the widely dispersed buildings. At the far end, a single chimney, all that remained of the old engine house, stood sentinel over this reminder of the moor's industrial past. Beyond that, my route took me to the eastern end of the Lich Way, a corpse road. To call this track a road is generous in the extreme. Its most obvious parts are so eroded now as to be more like stepping stones across the wild moor. This road I traversed from the opposite direction on my first camping trip on the moor. But to remind you of its significance, this trackway dated from the Middle Ages and reflected the power of the church over the local people. The dispersed communities of the moor between Postbridge in the east and Lidford on the western edge of Dartmoor had to carry their dear departed loved ones along the corpse road to be buried within the consecrated ground of Lidford Church Cemetery in grateful hope of resurrection and salvation. As I had been 4 years earlier, I was mindful of the stories of mournful, ghostly processions crossing the hills, only to disappear and reappear depending on whether the witness to the journey got too close. At the end of the Lich Way, I was far from the woods to the west, where the phantom torches were seen passing between the trees, and where the footsteps of horses rang out, reminiscent of the arrival of the hearse to take the dead on their last journey to the Chapel of Rest in Lidford. This time, though, my main preoccupation was not ghost sightings, but making my way first up to Longerford Tor and then onto Higher White Tor. In keeping with the theme of these stories, I had hoped to continue on to Devil's Tor on the next ridge of high ground, but the sun was already dipping in the sky, and recent rain had made the going boggier and more treacherous than had been forecast or hoped. That night, the Perseid meteor shower was due to peak, and I was not the only one on the moor hoping to enjoy the spectacle. The low Bronze Age stone row between the tors seemed to provide a ritual procession way pointing directly to Higher White Tor, the tallest in the area. I was reminded of how our ancestors' preoccupation with the stars ingeniously influenced the enigmatic monuments that they left behind. By now, my pack was uncomfortably heavy, and as I climbed higher, I saw the telltale sign that I had been beaten to the prize. 2 green tents had prime position on the leeward side of the stacked granite of Higher White Tor. No matter, they had as much right to enjoy the moor as me. I would proceed. Crossing a boundary wall over a precarious ladder, I paused at the top to consider my options. Ahead were a few other outcrops of Higher White Tor. Beyond that, the smaller Lower White Tor, and further on again, the crumbled remnants of Brown's house, hard by the upland bogs created by the impermeable granite just a few feet below the turf and soil. On inspection, I found a suitable stop on one of the small outcrops. It was level, dry, and pleasingly soft underfoot. The wind by now was getting up, and unpredictably swinging northerly in gusts, but I had faith in my tent to keep the breezes out. I pitched it, and finally eased off my boots and slipped on the flip-flops. It was time to soak in the peace of the high moor. As I always do, I climbed up the shallow side of the Tor and stood atop it in time to see the sun dip below the horizon of Bear Down and Devil's Tors. A Dartmoor sunset is reward enough for the heavy going of the walk up to the Tor, and as it slipped behind the gold-fringed clouds, rays of light reached upwards like fingers grasping desperately for the heavens in a losing battle against the coming of the night. Somehow unseen, and as ever, the sheep that had occupied the slopes seems to have dissolved into nothing, with only distant bleats echoing out across the high ground left as a reminder that they were ever there at all. With perhaps an hour left of useful light before the dark came properly at 9:30, I settled down on a ledge and warmed my army pasta on the stove, munching on tinned dates as they slowly bubbled. The dusk air was still clear, and my gaze turned towards Brown's house again. I planned to investigate this isolated ruin the next morning, and my mind drifted towards the legend associated with it as I popped another sugary date into my mouth. The story goes that the ruins of Brown's house sit as a monument to the hubris and jealousy of one man. Tom Brown had not made a success of being a doctor, so he decided to turn his hand to farming instead. The isolation of Dartmoor seemed to offer such a chance for him. Brown had few friends in any case, and those that knew him were particularly mystified at one piece of good fortune that seemed to have gone his way. Even those that liked him, the few of them that did, agreed that he was an ugly man, perhaps his face suiting his personality, but nonetheless he was a man of some means. Perhaps pressured by family into the promise of a stable life, a beautiful younger woman had accepted his marriage proposal. In the dying days of the Napoleonic Wars in 1812, the couple moved to Dartmoor to begin their new life. But Tom Brown was as jealous as he was ugly. Every time a younger, more handsome man cast his eyes on his pretty wife, an envious rage rose up in him. At last he chose a spot of the moor where they would be completely isolated, and where no other man would interrupt his interpretation of married bliss, however lonely and however miserable it was for his bride. Good-natured acquaintances warned him that such jealousy would never bring him happiness, nor the blessings of the Lord for a fruitful harvest, but he would not be deterred. A year passed and Brown had failed to improve and cultivate the barren, boggy land. Worse still, officials representing the Duchy of Cornwall visited Brown and informed him that he had no permission to have built a house in this land, but that out of goodwill, the Duke of Cornwall would allow him to remain in return for a fixed and extortionate rent. Brown battled on for another year or so before realising with sorrow that his jealous nature had brought him only ruin. He sold up and left, returning to more crowded society where hopefully his blameless wife found more joy and companionship. It is said that Brown's spirits can still be seen moving angrily between the ruined walls of his house, and that the soft weeping of his wife can be heard on the still nights. With this in mind, I shivered, put on another layer, and decided to attempt an hour or two of fitful sleep before the meteor shower began. As I zip-closed my small tent, and the ropes and fly sheet rustled in the still strengthening wind, my imagination allowed me to hear the angry howls of Brown's spirit. Rest was needed, but would it come? So ended the first day of my trip.
I hate men.
He's awful, isn't he?
Yeah, such a terrible man. It's like you didn't make it as a doctor, which, you know, back in the day was a pretty good profession.
Yeah, for sure.
And I know from listening to the Poisoner's Cabinet that you could pretty much be like Lily with 2 brain cells and be a doctor.
And not only that, the only thing that you needed as a doctor at that time was the trust of your patients.
Yeah.
And he clearly didn't even have that.
Yeah, he clearly just was a knob.
Yeah. I really feel for her because this is, of course, it's such a patriarchal time. She's so trapped, isn't she? And he seems so determined to trap her as well.
Yeah. And you can only imagine that, like, these men that are looking at her in the town or whatever, like, that is probably not happening. And she is just probably meekly going along with everything he says, and then he goes, right, we're off into in the wilderness of the moor, so nobody can ever lay their eyes on you. Fuck off.
Yeah. You almost want him to have an even stickier end rather than just becoming financially ruined, don't you? But the sad thing with this story is I could find no reference to what happened later on or whether she ever found any more happiness. I was able to establish he was quite a lot older than her, so hopefully, you know, this sounds maybe a bit harsh, but hopefully he just died and then she could enjoy the rest of her life.
Yeah, hopefully, and she could actually
out of it.
Yeah, and she could live a life.
But this is the thing about that location is I hope I tried to communicate to you just how isolated but how utterly beautiful Dartmoor is during that sunset. I can only describe the rays of light above those clouds as looking almost like a crown. It was just gorgeous, and no photograph I could take could just do it justice. So I just put my camera away in the end and just sat and enjoyed it. And I realize I keep on mentioning these tors, and it's spelled T-O-R. They're almost stacks of granite that you find eroded at the top of these hills. So they're all very distinctive in shape, and they've all got their own names, and many of them have got their own legends associated with them. I mean, not higher white tor, that's just the higher tor that looks sort of white from a distance. But it's a gorgeous place, but it's also bleak, and you get this sense of seeing Brown's house crumbled in the distance and thinking, oh yeah, that's where that absolute prick lived.
Yeah.
And it just brings you a little bit back down to earth. You realize there's the beauty all around you, but the whole landscape is also treacherous, and you've got to keep an eye on it. And so many of the people who've been attracted there over the years are similarly so. And your heart goes out to the poor Mrs. Brown, who, of course, as history so often does, doesn't even record her name.
Just the wife of.
Yes. Mrs. Tom Brown. Yeah.
Which is so annoying.
Isn't it just? Which is why we've got to do better these days as historians, because once the evidence of these people is gone, sometimes you're just never going to get it back.
Yeah.
So you know, in a way, if I'm ending this part of our tale on a bit of a downer, I think it's well worth reflecting on what's all around you on the moor. It is an incredibly reflective place, and I find that like tremendously mentally healing. Yeah. You just get to contemplate everything, so much about your own life, about the lives of the people who have gone before you, about the indelible marks that they've left on the landscape, whether that's from the Bronze Age or whether that's from today. And I think that sense of the marks on the landscape is a really important part of my trips up to Dartmoor, because as everyone should when they go up on the moor, your whole purpose up there should be to leave no trace, just footsteps. And the most unspoilt bits of the moor are like that. The only traces that should be left behind are from those generations in the past who are just reminding us with their echoes in the landscape of what has come before. So that's how the first day of my trip finished.
It sounds like you had an eventful first day.
I did. You always do, though, and you know that you're going to.
Yeah.
But it was incredible. Yeah, really enjoyed it. And I was so looking forward to the meteor shower that night. I hadn't actually planned to go up that day based upon this meteor shower. I'd planned to go up on that day based upon the fact that the weather forecast was good. So when I realised that the meteor shower was due as well, I thought, this is going to be really special. But I'll have to mention that another time, I think.
Oh, you're holding off on the wonders of the meteor shower until next time.
I'm afraid so.
Oh, Tim. Is there going to be a next time?
Well, if you'll have me.
Yes, I will have you. There will be a next time in the length of this 31 days of terror. There will be a couple of more next times.
Oh, thank goodness for that, because I have already written it, so it would have been a shame if not.
So imagine if I was like, actually, no, and you're like, oh, no, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's fine.
I mean, look, if that was at times a little bit light on the paranormal, I hope people haven't been put off by that. I wanted to give a sense of where Dartmoor is, because not everyone will have heard the Patreon episodes, and it's such a unique place. I tried to get a sense of what the moor is like, and by all means, search up images of it, and you'll maybe get 10% of an understanding of what it's like to be up there.
Yeah, it is amazing. And you're right. It was listening to you talk about, like, when you got as far as the sunset and you were like, actually, there's no point in trying to take pictures of this. Like, that is I think that's a sad lesson to learn, because you want to, it's not about kind of being, stuck to your phone or anything. It's like, I have to share this moment with people. It's so beautiful, but sometimes you just can't. And you just go, you know what? It's just going to be me and you, big world.
If you want to see it, come on up next time.
And also from like a therapeutic perspective, which is, not where you were going with this, and not where I thought this was going to go, but from a therapeutic perspective, a lot of therapists will say that being out in the big, wide open spaces of the outdoors is actually really good for your brain.
Oh, for sure. I've got no doubt about it. Whether I'm out running in the middle of nowhere. I mean, you know how much I loved living in Canterbury, Emma, and how many great friends that I made there, yourself included. But I've always been a country boy at heart.
Yeah.
I've always have been. And Canterbury's got some great countryside around about it. But I was talking to Sinead from the Poisonous Cabinet, her husband, Ben. He's got this thing where he gets really unnerved if he can't hear a road nearby, because that's just where he's always grown up.
Yeah.
And so when he's come down to visit me down here, he's been really put off by how quiet everything is. He doesn't like the fact that when he stops, he can't hear anything apart from birds and trees rustling and things. But for me, that's where I'm absolutely at my best. And if it sounds antisocial to say, I actually just love being out there on the own. I spend so much of my working life being stressed out and hearing constant noise and constant decision making, that any opportunity to be out on my own and to be able to think about whatever I want, whether it's happy or sad or important or trivial, just to have that time and that space. Time is the most valuable commodity any of us have, I think. And
no, definitely.
Yeah, I think it's a really healthy way for me to spend it.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny you should say that about our Ben, because so when Dan first came to my home place in Laois, and Dan was also like a really, really light sleeper. He could never, any noise would wake him up, any light would wake him up, right? So when he came to Laois, he couldn't sleep because it was too dark and too quiet. Because no street lights, no noise, no cars at nighttime, no nothing. And he was like, the next morning, he was like, what the fuck? This is real countryside. And I was like, yeah,
that's all right. And he loved his bird watching and everything else, didn't he? So I imagine during the day, he absolutely loved that side of things, but just found the whole, it's almost like sensory deprivation, I suppose, if you're not used to it.
Yeah, when you're a city boy and suddenly it's like, oh, this is real quiet.
Yeah.
And you're like, yes, it is.
And it's the way the sound travels as well. And it's so quiet at night that you hear the rustle of your tent. It does almost sound like people mucking around with it. And, I've once had a sheep try and interfere with the guy ropes on my tent on my first trip up. And I heard a distant dog barking, which had a bit of a ghostly tail attached to it as well, didn't it? But let's be honest, it probably was just some other camper's dog a few miles away.
Yeah, but that's not the point, okay? Never let the truth get in the way of a good story.
We decided this at the time, didn't we? That wasn't some other camper's dog. That was Jumbo the dog, who was bitten by an adder and now haunts Wispens Wood, wasn't it?
Yes.
But that's my first day done. And the next one had as many stories and as many adventures as the first. So I look forward to telling you all about that.
I look forward to hearing all about it, Tim. As always, it has been a pleasure. Thank you for being part of 31 Days of Terror 2024.
Thank
Can
you
you
for having me.
tell listeners where to find you?
Certainly can. So the only kind of socials that I really have are, I've got an Instagram account which is called Dry Wipe History, but my main pet project is my YouTube channel called Mr. Cloke History on YouTube. You know what, this is going to be a bit of a shameless plug, but at the time of recording, I'm really close to 10,000 subscribers, which feels like some sort of absolutely mind-blowing milestone to me. I know I'm not exactly going to be Mr. Beast, am I? But it's it would be fantastic to get over that. Well, you never know. I've got hundreds of videos on there, most of them quite short, that I've done as mini lessons for school kids. But I've been delighted to hear that people quite enjoy listening to them almost like a podcast and just plow through the playlist. So if you fancy learning some history lessons, then go on there, and it would be really lovely to have you on there. And please do subscribe if you've enjoyed what I've told you.
Tim, thank you so much. It has been an absolute joy to have you here.
Thank you, Emma.
1-800-Flowers.com knows that a gift is never just a gift. A gift is an expression of everything you feel and helps to build more meaningful relationships. 1-800-Flowers takes the pressure off by helping you navigate life's important moments by making it simple to find the perfect gift. From flowers and cookies to cake and chocolate, 1-800-Flowers helps guide you in finding the right gift to say how you feel. To learn more, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.